What is up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about some excellent AMOLED and OLED displays that you should check out for 2021 if you're on a budget. So let's go ahead and get started. So the Redmi Note 10 Pro is around $300 right now, and all links will be down below. And this is an excellent phone since I've been using it. It's got a very beautiful design on here. It's a glass back, plastic frame, IP53 dust and splash proof. It just has a really beautiful design, really interesting looking camera module. This display is an AMOLED display at 120 Hz. It's HDR10 plus. With 450 nits. It actually gets 1200 nits peak brightness as well, so it's a really nice display, very bright for a mid-ranger. It's 6.67 inches, so it's pretty big with the punch hole in the middle. You also have a 1080p resolution at 395 for the PPI. Overall beautiful display, especially for this price point of $300. Again, I've always been really wow with the colors and quality of this panel. Now you do have on here MIUI 12 with Android 11, the Snapdragon 732G is on here, and the Adreno 618 is on here as well. Pretty much it's pretty good at performance, just using social media apps, casually gaming on here. I really haven't had a problem with this phone as far as performance wise. You also have micro SD support and 6 gigs of RAM along with 64 gigs of internal storage, or 128 depending on what configuration you get. You also have some very nice sounding stereo speakers on this phone, along with a 3.5mm jack, and also you have NFC and an infrared port, so you can use this phone as a remote controller if you want to. You also have a really nice physical fingerprint scanner on the side where the power button is, and that works really great along with face unlock. And this phone also has a massive 5020 milliamp battery with 33 watt fast charging. And I guess the highlight with this phone is the camera setup. Now there's two configurations, a 64 megapixel and a 108 megapixel, and you also have an 8 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel macro, and 2 megapixel depth sensor, along with 4K video and a 16 megapixel selfie camera. It takes some pretty great photos, especially for this price. Very highly detailed photos, excellent ultra wide, pretty good macro camera, and you get a nice depth of field with the blur on this phone. Video is pretty solid, so overall it's a really nice phone for taking pictures. Video is also pretty solid too, so I really like this phone. Beautiful display and beautiful design. Next is the OnePlus 7 Pro. I've covered this phone a ton of times on this channel. It's still my daily driver, mostly because I think it has the best display on this list. Now it has a fluid AMOLED display at 90 Hz, HDR10 plus. It's a big phone at 6.67 inches. It actually has a 1440p display at 516 for the PPI. And the interesting thing about this phone is that there's no notch, no punch hole. It uses the pop-up camera mechanism, and you have a full screen design with a curve to it, so it just gives you that really cool immersive experience. It is just a really nice looking display. It's fairly bright, and again, 90 Hz is still pretty smooth, not as good as 120 Hz, but again, very smooth. And again, you have 1440p, so super high PPI on here as well. It just looks very sharp. Just a beautiful display. That's like one of the main selling points with this phone. You also have Android 11 on here with Oxygen OS, Snapdragon 855 and Adreno 640. This phone is still very fast and very capable launching applications, playing games and stuff like that at a pretty high setting. It's still really good for that. You also do not have any micro SD card support and no headphone jack. You do have 128 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM. You have very nice sounding stereo speakers on here, very loud, good bass punch. You also have NFC on board, and the under the display fingerprint sensor is very fast, and you can also take advantage of face unlock on this phone as well. You also have a 4000 milliamp battery with 30 watt fast charging as well, so it charges pretty fast, and it's pretty much an all-day phone for me at least. You do have a triple camera setup at 48 megapixel standard, 8 megapixel telephoto, and then a 16 megapixel ultra wide with 4K video, and then the pop-up camera is 16 megapixels. To me, for a point and shoot camera, this takes excellent photos, and there's also a Gcam application that you can download on the 7 Pro if you want to get the most out of this camera. But for me, just a casual shooter, this phone takes pretty great pictures, as you can see. Next is the Galaxy S10e. This is an excellent phone that got a crazy price slash. So it's now trending at around $250, and it's just an awesome phone for this price point. It is definitely more on the compact side as well, so really nice for people with smaller hands. It's got an aluminum frame, glass back on here. It's IP68 dust and water resistant. You also have a beautiful dynamic AMOLED HDR10 display at 5.8 inches, the punch hole on the right hand, and then you have a 1080p resolution with 438 for the PPI. So overall, a really beautiful display. It gives off some really nice vibrant colors as well, which is one of my favorite things about it, and it's also fairly bright as well. You do have Android 11 on here with the Snapdragon 855 and Adreno 640 on here, so this phone is still blazing fast when it comes to launching applications, and also does very good with gaming as well. You also have micro SD support, 128 gigs of internal storage, and 6 gigs of RAM on here. This phone also still keeps the headphone jack, and the stereo speakers on here sound excellent, very crisp and clear, really good bass on here. You also have NFC on board, with also the Samsung desktop support, and you also have reverse wireless charging, which means you can charge another device with this phone, which is really awesome. Now you also have on here a dual camera setup. It's a 12 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. It shoots 4K with a 10 megapixel selfie, and that also shoots 4K. This phone still takes excellent photos. Sometimes the photos can be a little bit contrasty. Other than that, you have excellent image quality on here when it comes to detail, depth of field. The ultra wide is really nice as well, and the video is overall very solid on this phone too. So this phone also has a physical fingerprint scanner mounted on the side, which works great, and you also have face unlock on this phone as well. I guess the only downside with the Galaxy S10e is battery life is just average, it's just okay. You have a 3100 milliamp battery with 15 watt charging, which to me is a little bit slow, and you also have wireless charging at 15 watts as well, which is really nice. But overall, the Galaxy S10e is just amazing for this price point right now. So if you do want an iPhone with an OLED display, the iPhone 10 is definitely a great price right now, trending at around $300, and this phone is still awesome for the price. It's one of my favorite iPhones actually. So you do have a Gorilla Glass back on here, stainless steel frame, IP67 dust and water resistant. You have the Super Retina OLED HDR10 display, 625 nits, 5.8 inch screen size with 1125 by 2436 resolution, 458 for the PPI. It's a really nice and beautiful looking display. Especially at this price point, you just get really nice colors, and it's fairly bright as well. This phone also is running the latest version of iOS, and it should still get updates for years to come. Because the processor is just so good on this phone. It's the Apple A11 chip, so I usually don't really notice any hiccups since the iOS 14 updates relatively fast, and you also have pretty good gaming experience on this phone as well. So I was really happy with performance on the iPhone 10. You also do not have any SD card support, of course, with iPhones. You also have 64 gigs of internal storage and 3 gigs of RAM. You have a stereo speaker setup, and that sounds actually really good bass quality on here, very loud, so I was really happy with that. No headphone jack on iPhones again, of course, and you also have NFC on this guy as well with your Apple Pay. Face ID still works really fast on this phone, so there's no issue there. And you also have on here pretty good cameras. The only thing I would say about the cameras is I wish they swapped the telephoto for an ultra wide, but you have a dual camera setup, 12 megapixel standard and 12 megapixel telephoto, 4K video. The video on this phone is actually still really solid as well. And you also have a selfie camera, which is pretty good still for FaceTime and stuff like that. Overall image quality was pretty good. You get pretty good colors, good detail. So I was really happy with the cameras, and you get that telephoto, so you get 2x optical zoom too. So the photos on here are fine. I didn't have an issue with image quality really. So this phone also is kind of a little underwhelming with battery life. 2716 milliamp battery, 15 watt charging, wireless charging is on board. Basically you can get around 6 hours of screen on time with this phone, maybe around 5 depending on how hard you use your phone. But overall the iPhone 10 is still an excellent buy. Last is the LG G8. This is still an excellent phone. You can find this phone from ranging from $200 to $300, and again I'll have all links down below. This is still an excellent buy. It has one of my favorite bodies on this list, very comfortable feeling phone, aluminum frame, glass back, IP68 dust and water resistant. The G8 also has a beautiful POLED HDR screen at 6.1 inches. It's a 1440p display as well at 564 for the PPI. It's a very sharp and very high res looking display here. It gives off some excellent colors and also just very bright as well. This phone has Android 10, and it was on LG's update list to receive Android 11 and 12. You do have the Snapdragon 855 on here and Adreno 640, so this is still a pretty powerful phone. Also, so when it comes to just navigating and also gaming, this is still pretty powerful. You also have micro SD support, 128 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM on here. You have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack on here with the quad DAC, so it's just an amazing audio experience on this phone. You also have on here NFC, and you also have really good Face ID as well. So you also have Hand ID, which kind of works some of the time, but honestly I don't really use it. And this phone also has some pretty good cameras on it, a 12 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. You also have a 4K video with an 8 megapixel selfie. You still get very natural looking colors on the G8, pretty good detail as well, good depth of field. You also have a really sharp looking ultra wide camera on here, so I was overall really happy with the G8 as far as the cameras go, especially for this price point. This phone also has pretty good battery life as well. You have a 3500 milliamp battery with 21 watt fast charging with 9 watt wireless charging. So I usually average around 7 to 8 hours of screen on time with this phone, which is pretty good. So that's pretty much it for my list. Be sure to let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.